You might be wondering why we chose budgeting municipal finances for the last presentation. I think it's very important that you have a high-level view of municipal finance and budgeting. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce to you the recently retired city manager from Kettering, Mark Schwieterman. Mark's a UD grad and began a very distinguished career in public service with the city of Kettering, who had the good fortune of bringing him into their organization. He started out as a financial analyst. Then he quickly moved up in the organization, serving as tax manager, budget manager, assistant to the city manager, and then assistant city manager. So there was only one additional rung to climb there, and City Council had the good sense to appoint Mark as city manager in 2006, and he served in that capacity until his recent retirement. Over the years, Mark has held many positions in organizations that promote and support professionals in local government and management, including the International City Management Association, Ohio City Management Association, Ohio Municipal League, and the Greater Dayton Mayors and Managers Association. Unselfishly, Mark has served as a mentor and advocate for many young people who have chosen local government as a career. My final comment here is that Mark sent me his PowerPoint the other day, and I'm looking through it, and I said, wow, this is kind of lengthy. And then I saw like 35 pages. I said, wow, this is the last presentation of the day. 35 pages. Mark, I would just remind you of this time-honored quote that the more you say, the less people remember.
A more famous saying would be brief and be gone. So I will try to live up to that as well. I want to start by saying I did not give that bio to Jay. The bio I gave him was one sentence, so he went a little overboard there. I'm very pleased to be here, and I think we could probably move through the first slide because you now know who I am. What I do want to do is give credit to Mark Schlagheck and Tom Judy, two renowned professionals in the finance of local government area who have given this presentation in the past. And you have probably already learned that in government and in business and anywhere else, if you can borrow, do it. It's quicker. So we are using a three-person PowerPoint here as we all kind of contributed to it. The unique thing about local government is we don't make widgets. We don't sell one particular thing. We do a lot of things. We do police, we do fire, water, sewer, trash, parks and rec, everything from leaf collection to providing an EMS run at your most dire need. So because of that, we have to have an accountability and a financial structure that matches that diverse set of duties that we perform. So we have things that are like government funds, police, fire, public service, core services. Every city does them in one way or another. We have business type funds like water and sewer, where essentially water and sewer needs to operate like a business, make money, and sustain itself. So those are the business type funds. Again, we're talking about accountability, and in my opinion, a former budget manager, the accountability comes through the most important policy document that City Council looks at, and that's the budget. Your budget can set your path. It can also regulate you to make sure that you're following the proper rules and procedures. So fund accounting is nothing more than buckets of money, right? So I am going to use an example for buckets. And because I didn't want to carry a bucket here, we're going to have buckets of water. Essentially, each glass, each bucket of water is a fund, okay? And we're going to add to it, we're going to take from it, we're going to move it around, and at the end of the year, we hope our buckets have water in them. It's as simple as that, okay? Now, to keep moving money around, or keep moving those buckets around, you got to have the community. So we've got the community over here, and they're going to help us do that as we go through this presentation and as you go through elected officials of a local government. We've already done that. See how quickly I'm going, Jay? Already through that slide. We didn't even stop on it. So here you can see some of the funds or the buckets that you're dealing with. You have the general fund. If you wouldn't mind, play along with me, but that's your personal checking account at home. Okay, that's where most activity takes place. You have special revenue funds. A good example of that would be Parks and Recreation. You've got a separate bucket to run your Parks and Recreation department. You may even have a separate property tax levy that fills that bucket. That's a special revenue fund. You don't have to make profit in a special revenue fund, but you typically have a special or a specified revenue source going into that bucket. You have capital project funds. Capital projects, infrastructure, we're talking roadways, buildings, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, permanent improvements like that. Proprietary funds are those enterprise funds. That's the water and sewer. That's the thing that has to sustain itself. Its own revenue source doesn't get money from the general fund. Also includes internal service funds. Internal service funds are just that. They provide services to the operation of the government, not necessarily to the community that it serves. A good example of that would be your information technology department inside the government that simply provides computers and Wi-Fi to your staff, not to the community. Fiduciary funds, in the interest of time, let's just say we're holding money that doesn't necessarily belong to us. We're just the fiduciary of that money until it is spent. So budget. Presumably everybody does a budget annually. It's an itemized summary of intended expenditures to carry out your stated purpose and to finance them. So what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? How are you going to pay for it? Put a budget together. Same thing you do at home when you're trying to decide how to spend the checkbook. What are you going to spend it on? Kids' education or a nice vacation to Hawaii? I always chose the kids' education. I'm not so sure now in hindsight, but Hawaii would have been nice. And then I'm going to use the word appropriated a little bit here, and that is a government term. Appropriated just means authorization to spend something. We're going to appropriate funds. You appropriate funds in the budget. Then when you get ready to spend that money, you issue a purchase order, which is an encumbrance against that appropriation. And then you write the check to pay for the service you received. That's kind of the cycle as you take money out of your buckets of water. So the budget's a financial tool. There's no doubt about that. Everybody, I'm sure, understands that. It's also helping you establish public policy. It's what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, who has the authority to change budgets. It's a control mechanism, accountability mechanism. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's the most important policy document because it forces you annually to decide what is it you want to achieve, how you're going to get there, and how you're going to pay for it. Now we'll talk long-term planning a little bit so that you're not doing that just annually. You want to do that more often than that, or more long-term than that. So what is a balanced budget? That's a great question because unfortunately it is different for maybe every community. A balanced budget could simply be current revenues are greater than current expenditures. What that is telling you is you have a fund balance that carries over from year to year. You're not using that fund balance to balance your budget. It's truly a rainy day catastrophic fund because the money coming in the year is the only money going out in that year. It could be that. That's what Kettering does. Kettering only uses fund balance for capital improvement. They don't use it for salaries or day-to-day operations. It could be current year revenue plus some of your fund balance minus expenses. And we're going to show you, I'll show you a slide on that. It could also be current year revenue minus expenses plus some portion of your fund balance, not all of it. So you're setting some money aside. And I have there in red the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association. They establish guidelines for how much fund balance you should have. So this is a slide I stole from a thumb drive I had at home from 2015, apparently. But this is showing you the City of Kettering's fund balance. The red color is the required GFOA fund balance. Kettering chose to use GFOA's guideline of 90 days or 25% of your expenditures. So that red color is 90 days. We have enough fund balance to run the city if no revenue came in for 90 days. The blue amount is an enviable position to be in. That is fund balance in excess of the minimum requirement from GFOA. So our fund balance in Kettering in 2015 was the total of those two colors, but we never dipped below or planned to dip below into that red level because that was our minimum requirement. Again, water. We've all had water in our basement, right? Everybody understands water in the basement. Think of your fund balance as water in the basement. You can only go down the basement steps to get some of that water if you follow the policies of your community and the budget document of your community. And if it says you can only use it for capital improvements, well, then you go down the basement to get some water when you're going to build a building or a road. You don't go down there to pay a police officer. The budget cycle can vary from community depending on size or your willingness to participate in the budget. So in Kettering, our cycle was really March through December. So for 9 months, we were planning out where we were going to go. And it had different processes. And you should identify what those processes are and communicate those processes, not only with your council and with your administration, but also with your public, so that they know when they can input into that process and let you know what they're looking for in a budget. But essentially, you prepare the budget, you adopt the budget through an appropriation resolution at the end of the year typically, and then you implement that budget starting on January 1st if you're a calendar year. What are your revenue sources and how do you choose them? Income tax is significant in the state of Ohio. We have a local income tax in Ohio. Most cities rely on income tax. Townships rely on property tax. Some cities don't have an income tax. Not very many, but some. It depends on the elasticity of your risk tolerance. Income tax has a risk to it. Great rewards when Julie does a fantastic job at the coalition and lands a few big projects for your community and your income tax numbers go way up. When those numbers go way down, say the pandemic, that's a problem because that income tax source is very elastic. It will go up, it will go down, you got to budget through that. Property tax, less elasticity. Doesn't go up as high, doesn't go down as low, a little more stable of a source, a little easier to plan for. The estate tax is only on this slide because it used to be a big number for local governments. It's not anymore. It was eliminated in 2012. The local government fund is the state's sharing of revenues back to local government. That's a major source. And then you have fees or licenses that go through the state, like the gas tax, motor vehicle registrations. Grants are imperative at the local government level. And what I will say, a great question about what size economic development project do you take to the coalition? In my opinion, forget about size. Call the coalition, tell them about your project, because they know where all the grants are, they know where all the buckets of money might be. Engage them in a conversation. They may not officially be able to help you, but they will certainly unofficially guide you to success. So don't hesitate to use the resources that are in this region, Jobs Ohio and the divisions of Jobs Ohio, like the Dayton Development Coalition, are very important for that. Investment income. Here's what I want to tell you about investment income. Your risk tolerance at the city that you are the elected official of should be lower than your risk tolerance for your home funds. Okay? And really by state law, it has to be. So don't walk into a council workshop and say, our investment earnings are only 3%. At home, I'm making 11. There's no comparison. At home, you are allowed to lose money and take that risk. At your local government that you're now responsible for and accountable for, you don't have that risk tolerance. So your risk reward is going to be lower. Now, right now, that reward is greater than it's been in a very long time in local government. It was not uncommon for years on end for us to have a 1% rate of return. Well, now that common number is probably 3 to 5% because of the changes in the federal economy. But just, okay, I may have editorialized there a little bit about my feelings of being chastised for having such a low rate of return when I was the city manager. Here's some more major sources. EMS billing is one of the newer major sources of revenue, and that is a very good source of funds for a special revenue fund. If you have a special revenue fund that runs your fire department and you have EMS receipts, that money goes into that glass of water, into that bucket of water to help fund your fire department. And I assume everybody knows what an EMS receipt is, but basically it's a transport fee. So if you're transported by EMS to a hospital, they bill the insurance company. The insurance company pays a fee. Like all other insurance payments, it's not normally the fee we bill them for. It's what they've agreed to pay. And then they pay that amount. And depending on your organization, it's probably a soft bill, meaning if the insurance company doesn't pay it, you're not making the resident pay it. And frankly, many cities decided to implement this because the insurance companies were increasing their premiums to cover the cost of payments they had to make for transport fees. So we as local communities might as well collect that fee. There are other fees, wastewater, sewer, stormwater, and my only note here is you may not have all these things because you may contract it out. Kettering contracted out trash. Our water and sewer was provided through the county. So in Kettering, although it's almost 60,000 people, 18 square miles, we did not have any enterprise funds because we contracted out those services either to other governments or for trash, Rumpke, or waste management. We already talked about income tax versus property tax. The other element of that is resident versus non-resident. Income tax, a lot of non-residents are coming into your community paying an income tax. So that's where the non-resident versus resident element of that comes in. Employed versus retired, local government income tax are taxing the workers. They are not taxing your pensions. So retirement income is not taxable as an income tax at the local level. User fee versus tax. Do you have everybody pay a tax to provide your parks and recreation? Or do you have elements of parks and recreation that you simply state, this program is user fee based. If you want to go to the ice arena, you're going to pay a user fee. If you're going to go to our park and just use it as a green space, that's funded by the tax dollars. So you can have different types of fee structures within your entity. I'm not going to get into this because most of you here are not a statutory form of government, but just to say you have to pass a budget in order to appropriate funds, and you have to have appropriated funds in order to spend money. And that's just not your local ordinance, but that's the state of Ohio as well. So you're going to appropriate a budget. You're going to appropriate $100,000 for a fire truck. On January 15th, the city manager says we're going to buy the fire truck. So they encumber that money with a purchase order to fire truck manufacturing company. Then at the end, when that truck comes in, 18 to 24 months later, again, a little editorial comment, you'll write the check. That check, 2 years later, goes against the appropriation you made 2 years earlier. You carry over the encumbered appropriation to make sure you have the money when it's time to write the check. Again, that is accountability and it's fund accounting. There are different levels to appropriate funds. So picture you have a city and you have a $100 million budget. Inside that city, you have 12 departments and they all get a bucket of money. Inside your finance department, they get a bucket of money for personnel, for operating supplies, and for capital equipment. You as an agency, an organization, have to decide what level of budgeting you're going to appropriate by. You could appropriate at the level of the city. Nobody's doing that, but you could. You could appropriate at the level of the department. Many folks do that. You could appropriate at the level of inside the department, personnel, operating, and capital equipment. An example, Kettering will appropriate $1,000 for the finance department. Their budget will show that $337 goes to personnel, to capital, and to operating. So there's $337, whatever that is, right? The way Kettering has set it up, City Council must approve moving appropriation from one department to another. The city manager can move the money inside the department from personnel to operating or personnel to capital. But you as the elected officials and the policies you have established for your entity decide how you appropriate the funds and who has the authority to move. So the thing that I always tried to remember was if I picked up something and it had water in it and I was going to pour it over here, I had to check first to make sure I was authorized to do that, right? Because most times changes in appropriations have to go back to the city council. So changes in appropriation are not a bad thing. And hopefully we'll talk about it now. Changes in appropriations are not a bad thing. They're done by what's called supplemental appropriations. So during the year, after your budget's adopted, it'll come back to you through your administration or even at the council level. Hey, we need to do a supplemental appropriation. We're going to change the budget. That's all you're doing, you're changing the budget. You could be moving money around with no new water, or you could be adding water because you had an unexpected expenditure. Fire truck A runs into a house and can't be rebuilt. You got to buy a new fire truck. Well, you didn't have it budgeted. You go back to council, I need new money for the fire department for capital equipment. And then they can spend that money on that new fire truck. So not all supplementals are bad. It doesn't mean there was a mistake. It just means things change. So try to keep that in mind. Again, editorializing some of my supplemental appropriation discussions with City Council. There are many types of budgeting. I'm not going to go through this. Just be aware that there are many types. And when your staff are talking about their budgets, they will let you in on what type of budget you have. If your budget workshop takes 5 days, I guarantee you are doing a line item budget, because sometimes line item budgets take forever to go through. But those are the types. Just be aware that there are many. So a couple of the budget policies you as council should be involved in, right? What is the definition of a balanced budget? Deciding whether current revenues minus current expenses is balanced. If that is the case, that is probably the most conservative level of budgeting. Because you're that conservative, you are going to get to some point in the year where the manager or staff comes to you and says, I don't know that I can fund all the police officers and all the firefighters because we had an economic downturn and I think I need to use reserves. You got two choices: amend your policy and allow that, or reduce the hours of police officers that you have. So you need to establish and be a part of that policy setting process for what is a balanced budget. You need to decide what level of reserves you are going to maintain. GFOA says 15 to 25%. Kettering chose 25. Other communities choose 15%. You need to establish that and then create your little colored chart so that you know where you are throughout the year, that you're maintaining that balance. You have to have a process for amending your budget, and that's the supplemental appropriations we talked about. And then you need to do some long-term financial planning. So I want to talk a little bit about that since we're almost at 4 o'clock. But when you're putting a long-term plan together, you need to look at, say, 5 years of where these funds are going to be. How much water is going to be in your bucket in each fund over the next 5 years? Because essentially, with a few exceptions, every one of your glasses at the end of the year has to have water in it. You have to have a positive fund balance. So you got to plan for that. Because if it's not going to be positive, your document, your long-term forecast says, we're going to take some money out of the general fund and we're going to pour it into the special revenue fund because it was getting too low. Well, you budget for that transfer. Moving water from one bucket to another is called a transfer. A transfer is appropriated. An appropriation is in your budget document. So you're planning for that. And typically you need a good 5-year plan to kind of do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that while we still have some time. So long-term planning. As you can tell, Mark Schlagheck is a hockey fan. So he refers to Wayne Gretzky's famous quote, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been." Tom Judy is a baseball fan. If you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up somewhere else, from Yogi Berra. And I like electricity. So by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. You have to have a plan. You have to have a 5-year plan, or you should have a 5-year plan. Please remember, and maybe that's why guideline is jumping out at you on the screen. It's a guideline. Nobody is going to be able to give you a 5-year plan and everything in that plan is going to absolutely happen just like you said it would. If you hold your city managers to that level of accountability, you are going to have multiple city managers in your tenure, right? So it's just not going to work that way. But it is a guideline, and it's an organizational-wide guideline of a plan. So we're going to look at our revenues, we're going to look at our expenditures, we're going to look at what Julie tells us the regional economy is going to be. We're going to look at the state of Ohio and the government up there and what the governor's planning to do. We're going to look at what our businesses are telling us they're planning on doing. And then we're going to have a strategy to take all that information and become a sustainable community over the next 5 years. Have enough money to do what we do, or change what we do based upon the money that we have. So I've already mentioned 3 to 5 years is optimal. You want to look at it every year. So it's a rolling 5 years, but look at it every year, make those changes, try to keep it up to date. There are benefits to it, obviously. It helps you with goal setting. It helps you see the future. It helps you understand what you do in the big picture to get you where you need to be. And it gives you some time to get out of the weeds, right? I mean, you're going to be very much in the weeds when all you think about is council meetings and legislation and what the manager's telling you in workshop about the business down on the corner, right? You get into the weeds of your day-to-day, you forget that council is a policy-making body, and that requires them to look out here into the big picture and see the big things over multiple years. This document can help you with that. It also helps you with bond ratings and demonstrating accountability and planning for when that bucket doesn't have any water in it. So it's a good tool. It does have some challenges. It's not really all that fun. So it might be hard to get all of you to sit in the room long enough to get one done. Because the weeds are fun sometimes because you're helping people directly, right away, short term. So just getting everybody's buy-in is difficult. It's the same for staff. It's another task. It doesn't have that immediate payback. The other problem with long-term projections like this is they compound on them. So if in year one something could be bad and you put that in the forecast, well, that could be bad carries on for the next 4 years for all 5 years. It just multiplies on itself the negative feeling, right? So if a large corporation is laying off employees in that first year, it not only takes your income tax out there, it takes your income tax out the next 4 years, and it takes out the 2% growth that you normally get on the bottom line of your income tax. So a small change becomes a material number through a 5-year process. And frankly, that makes it very difficult for staff and elected officials because it almost creates this doomsday image of your financial forecast. And you have to be careful with that. Don't get bogged down by that. One way around that is best case, worst case, medium case. Have 3 plans. Wake up one day very optimistic, put that best case plan together. You wake up on a Monday morning, you don't want to be at work, put that worst case down. And then end somewhere in the middle with your plan. You'll get more use out of it, and it'll be a more valuable tool. The last part of the financial process, and I'm only 4 minutes late, the last part of that process is the audit. You are required to have an audit. The audit can come from the state auditor's office, or it can come from an independent auditor that your city hires with agreement and partnership from the state auditor. But you are going to have an audit. That audit's good because it looks at where you've been, what you've done, but it's also going to help you with what you need to change moving forward. So that's a valuable tool. There's an opinion letter and a management letter. Those documents, you don't have to know the numbers, but do read the text. You can ignore the footnotes even, but read the management letter, read the recommendations they make. You might even get an internal control policy recommendation, which is good for you to understand what additional steps might need to be in a policy perspective regarding to your finance. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.